Welcome back to our four-part series on Charles Manson. In Part 1, we uncovered the turbulent childhood and early criminal experiences that shaped Manson's personality and worldview. Now, in Part 2, we'll examine how he leveraged his charisma and manipulative skills to draw in followers, creating what would come to be known as the family. We'll see how the cultural backdrop of the 1960s dovetailed with Manson's own ambitions, ultimately bringing together a group capable of doing almost anything he asked. When Charles Manson was released from prison in 1967, he stepped into a world in flux, particularly in San Francisco's Haight-Ashbury district, the epicenter of the Summer of Love. Scores of young people flocked there, many estranged from traditional family structures and hungry for alternative philosophies. Manson's natural ability to charm and manipulate found fertile ground here. He saw that a key to hooking people was to offer what they longed for: love, acceptance, a sense of belonging. He also tapped into the era's fascination with spirituality and mysticism. Manson borrowed ideas from various religions, bits of Scientology he'd picked up, and notions of free love. He wove these together into a narrative that cast him as a guide toward enlightenment. Over time, a small group of mostly young women gravitated to him. They saw in Manson someone who seemed older, wiser, even paternal, somebody who professed unconditional love. They didn't realize that Manson's paternal veneer masked a drive for control. Before long, Manson realized that music was an excellent hook as well. He would host informal jam sessions, brandishing his guitar and singing songs packed with cryptic, spiritual undertones. Attendees often smoked marijuana or dropped LSD, further lowering their inhibitions and making them more receptive to his message. Manson's style combined gentle reassurance with stirring proclamations about a revolution of the mind, mesmerizing many who encountered him. Some found it odd that he was older than the average hippie in Haight-Ashbury. But Manson capitalized on that discrepancy. He held himself out as someone who'd lived the hard life and come out with profound insight. From there, the group grew. People brought friends, who brought more friends, all intrigued by the idea of communal living guided by a charismatic visionary. By late 1967, Manson's group, still relatively small, left San Francisco, eventually drifting to Los Angeles in search of bigger connections in the music industry. Manson believed that success in music would not only grant him fame, but provide a broader platform for his budding philosophy. He targeted producers, musicians, and anyone else he believed could open doors. During this period, the group crashed in random apartments and occasionally managed to talk their way into affluent homes, thanks largely to Manson's bold charm. His followers adopted a nomadic lifestyle, trusting Manson's lead and responding to his directive that they should discard their egos and embrace total loyalty to him. To them, it was a journey of spiritual liberation. To Manson, it was a growing power base. Eventually, Manson and his followers settled at Spahn Ranch, a former movie set for westerns on the outskirts of Los Angeles. The ranch's owner, George Spahn, old, nearly blind, tolerated their presence. In return, Manson's followers helped around the ranch, and some of the young women offered companionship to Spahn. Spahn Ranch became the de facto headquarters for Manson's family. Its remote, rugged setting gave the group freedom to live unconventionally. No established routine, few outside rules, and minimal law enforcement oversight. Manson established himself as the absolute authority, holding council sessions where he preached about upcoming social and racial upheavals, often referencing a grand prophecy he believed was imminent. The living conditions were rough: no structured schedule, frequent drug use, and a lack of personal privacy. Yet the constant flux also fed Manson's control. Members depended on each other for food and shelter and looked to Manson for direction. Those who questioned him risked ridicule, or worse. Over time, the group became increasingly insular, with Manson's voice serving as their primary source of information and worldview. Psychological manipulation was central to Manson's method. He often used LSD-fueled trips to reinforce his dominance. He would dictate when and how much drugs his followers took, sometimes abstaining himself or taking smaller doses so he could maintain control over the situation. Under LSD, normal inhibitions and critical thinking could dissolve. Manson used these moments to feed his apocalyptic visions and reinforce loyalty. He'd play guru, weaving biblical allusions, references to popular music, and doomsday scenarios into a narrative that cast him as humanity's guide in a period of imminent chaos. Followers who had left their families and mainstream society behind had no competing voice telling them otherwise. In addition to cultivating his communal lifestyle, Manson still pursued his dream of becoming a famous musician. A pivotal moment came when he met Dennis Wilson of the Beach Boys, an encounter facilitated by two of Manson's female followers who'd been hitchhiking. This chance meeting opened doors to Hollywood parties and introduced Manson to industry insiders. For a while, Wilson allowed Manson and several family members to stay at his home. Manson's mesmerizing aura intrigued Wilson, who introduced him to music producer Terry Melcher. Manson hoped Melcher would sign him to a record deal. During this phase, Manson's narcissism and ambition were on full display. He believed his music could transform society and demanded that those he deemed important acknowledge his genius. But things didn't pan out. Despite initial interest, Melcher and others grew wary of Manson's erratic behavior and controlling nature. The group eventually wore out their welcome with Dennis Wilson and lost the chance at a major record deal. This disappointment and rejection started to amplify Manson's paranoia and anger toward the entertainment establishment and society in general. By 1969, the fabric of the family's life at Spahn Ranch began to unravel. The lack of success in music, ongoing drug abuse, and Manson's apocalyptic ramblings all merged to create a tense environment. Manson now spoke more fervently about Helter Skelter, referencing the Beatles song as a prophecy of a coming race war. He claimed the family had a role in igniting or surviving this war. He framed violence as inevitable and even necessary, planting the idea in his followers' minds that the group might have to act to spark or hasten the cosmic change he predicted. Through relentless indoctrination, he built a narrative that external enemies threatened them, enemies who had to be stopped. The stage was set for tragedy. And that wraps up part 2 of our series on Charles Manson. We've seen how he assembled a loyal commune by mixing free love, spiritual rhetoric, and psychological manipulation, fueled by a changing world in the late 1960s. But what began as a quasi-hippie collective was on the verge of something much darker. In part 3, we'll delve into the crimes themselves, how the tension and paranoia at Spahn Ranch erupted into acts that shocked the nation. We'll walk through the chain of events leading up to the Tate LaBianca murders and the subsequent investigation. Stay tuned for part 3, The Crimes and Aftermath.